Chapter 10. A Voice in the Dark. Jonathan crouched on his hands and knees, panting in the blackness. He'd never seen such darkness before, so total and suffocating. Down in the deepest dungeon, pinned beneath a prison of dark stone, there was hardly even memory of light. His eyes gasped at the mouth of like a fish yanked out of the water. They found no light to breathe. He waited for arms to wrap around his waist, long, scaly fingers to close around his throat, teeth to pierce his shaking flesh. But one panic breath passed, then another. All there was complete darkness, and the sound of his gasping lungs and the same rhythmic watery thuds and sloshes of the hatch. The stone under his hands was moist and clammy. The frigid, hard floor began to hurt his knees. His racing heart began to slow down just enough for him to start to think. He tried to slow his lungs down. He felt with his hands and found the lantern. The glass was broken, and he shook and tapped it, but he knew that restarting it in the dark was impossible. He was lost, in the dungeon of the asylum, in the total darkness, with a skull. He couldn't help but wonder where the rest of the body was. "Crap!" he whispered and tried not to freak out. Still on his hands and knees, he turned around and started crawling back up the stairs, away from the hatch, his hands feeling through the inky black mystery in front of him. He found the steep stairs and tumbled up them, bumping his knees and knocking his elbow on the stone wall. Behind him, the hatch rumbled and chopped. He scrambled faster, climbing up the staircase to the landing. He tripped on the last step and fell, twisting onto his back. Something scrabbled away from him in the darkness and the sharp claws. It sounded big. Gasping, he jumped to his feet and felt around the walls. His breaths came fast and shallow. His heartbeat drummed in his head. He staggered with his hands reaching out in front of him like a blind man until his foot hit a stair and he fell again into a brutal stone. With the hatch behind him thumping as loudly as his heart was in his ears, he raced up in a stumbling crawl. He got to the top and felt a corner, a turn, and he shuffled with feeling fingers around it. The noise of the hatch got quieter. He kept one hand on the wall to his right and fumbled down a long corridor until he could no longer hear the hatch at all. He was still in absolute blackness, his eyes blinking and rolling and seeing nothing. He stopped for a moment to catch his breath and calm down, leaning against the wet stone wall. He dropped his head against the wall and sucked in great gasps of musty air and blew it out through his round lips until his lungs weren't heaving and his heart was merely pumping and not pounding. Then he remembered. The rope! He had never dunked under or run into the rope stretched across the top of the stairwell, which could only mean one thing. He'd gone the wrong way. After his spinning fall on the landing, he must have stumbled up the wrong staircase, the one that had led in the opposite direction that he and Walter and Colin had come down. He gulped, and his breath started speeding up again. He'd have to backtrack back down the seething hatch, or go forward into the darkness and mystery and unexplored passages. Behind him, dimly, he heard a sharp bang and grumble. The hatch. It was just a door, a rusty, wet door of ancient iron that held something back, but for some reason Jonathan felt like it was waiting for him, hungry in the dark. He clenched his teeth and took a step forward. The corridor was straight for a while, 10 or 15 steps. His fingers found one doorway closed with a wooden door so rotten it crumbled under his fingertips, but he continued past it. At the end of the straightaway, the hall turned into a sharp L to the right, and Jonathan scooted around the corner. He stopped and listened, hoping to hear the voices of the other boys or even a sound of the ocean, which would mean a window or a door to the outside. But there was only the always and everywhere sound of water dripping, and his own echoey breaths, and the occasional distant scratchings of claws in the dark. He took a step forward, and the world was gone. His foot would only found air beneath it, and he tried to catch himself on the wall, but there was no grip on the slimy surface, and he fell forward with a scream. Dank air whistled past his face. He thrust his arms desperately out in front of him, and he slammed with horrible force into a down staircase, the edges of the stairs like sharpened fists hammering his body. He slid and rolled and bounced down the stairs, each stair yanking a grunt or a groan from him. At the bottom, gasping into darkness, he lay with his cheek in a cold puddle and felt each pain pulse in his body. He flexed his fingers, wiggled his toes, bent his knees and his elbows. Nothing's broken, he said out loud. His voice sounded small and alone in that empty darkness. There was a rusty taste of blood in his mouth. He was just pushing himself up into his hands and knees when he saw it. He froze mid-crouch, and he tried to blink it away, but it was still there. Light. A thin line of light, glowing somewhere off ahead of him. With nothing else in the blackness for his eyes to compare it to, he couldn't tell if it was just out of reach of his fingers or 50 feet away. But it was there, shining in the darkness. He started crawling towards it, his knees and palms splashing through grimy puddles. The light got clearer, more solid around the edges. The line of light was coming from under a door. And so, as he watched, the shadow moved across it, and then was gone. Someone or something was moving on the other side of the door. Jonathan strained his ears for the sound. A voice, a laugh. Was it the other boys? The scars? Had he circled around in the darkness, back to where he started? He couldn't hear anything, except maybe a low humming. He rose to his feet and took a step closer, and then two more. Water leaked into his shoes, and it was again a deep humming song. He didn't know the tune, and it definitely wasn't one of the scars. It was the voice of a grown-up. He took one final step to the door. His foot came down on a teetering pile of something, stacked just outside the door. They clattered and crashed to the floor, tittering and shattering and skittering on the stones. The humming stopped. There was a grunt and a growl from behind the door. Jonathan took one step back, but then froze. The door jerked forward, flooding the corridor with yellow light. Jonathan's eyes burned, and he threw his arm over his face. A deep, rumbling voice like wet boulders scraping together rasped out of the blinding light. "What are you doing here?"